The lobby of the Wakefield Grand Hotel sparkled like a stage set for royalty. Crystal chandeliers threw gold light across the marble floor. Waiters in white gloves carried trays of champagne. 200 of the city's wealthiest guests filled the room, laughing, clinking glasses, posing for photographs beneath silk banners that read, "A Night of Legends." And in the middle of all that shine stood a man in a faded bellhop uniform, holding a leather suitcase that wasn't even his, waiting, as he always did, to be noticed only when someone needed something carried. His name was Marcus Webb. He had worked at this hotel for 6 years. 6 years of, boy, get my bags. 6 years of guests stepping around him like he was furniture. 6 years of swallowing his pride in a uniform with a frayed collar because the job paid his mother's medical bills and nothing else mattered more than that. Tonight, he made one mistake. He smiled at a guest. He stepped forward to help. And the hotel's general manager, Regina Hartley, dressed in a crimson gown that cost more than Marcus made in a month, turned on him in front of everyone. "Do you think this is your stage?" she said, her voice slicing through the music. "Get back where you belong before you embarrass this entire hotel." The room laughed. Cameras flashed. Marcus stood frozen, humiliation burning up his neck and into his ears. But he did not cry. He did not argue. He simply smiled. A small, quiet, knowing smile. Because upstairs, locked inside a briefcase in the penthouse suite, were contracts with his name on them. Contracts that would transfer ownership of this entire hotel, and 17 others just like it, into his hands by sunrise. Regina Hartley had just humiliated her new owner. And she had no idea. 3 hours earlier, the sun was setting behind the glass towers of downtown, and Marcus Webb stood in the hotel's employee locker room buttoning the same uniform he had worn for 6 years. The fabric was thinner now at the elbows. The brass buttons had lost their shine. But he kept it clean. He kept it pressed. Because his mother always told him, the way you carry yourself is the one thing nobody can take from you. His mother, Loretta Webb, had raised him alone in a small apartment on the east side of the city, working double shifts as a hospital aide so Marcus could finish school. When she got sick 4 years ago, her kidneys failing, her body growing weaker each season, Marcus took this job at the Wakefield Grand not because he dreamed of carrying suitcases, but because the hours fit around her dialysis appointments, and the paycheck, small as it was, kept the lights on. What none of his co-workers knew, what none of the guests who looked through him every single day could possibly imagine, was that Marcus Webb had once been someone entirely different. Before the hospital bills. Before the late nights driving his mother to treatment. Before he folded his ambitions into a small box and buried it under responsibility, Marcus had built a logistics software company from his college dorm room. He had sold it 8 years ago for an amount that changed his life overnight. He had invested wisely, quietly, the way people do when they grew up with nothing and never trust money to stay. When his mother got sick, he didn't tell anyone about the money. He simply came home. He took this job, not because he needed it, but because grief and fear made him want something simple, something physical, something that let him carry someone else's burden instead of sitting alone with his own. Carrying suitcases became a strange kind of therapy. Nobody recognized him. Nobody asked him for anything except his hands and his patience. And in this lobby, surrounded by people who never looked twice at him, Marcus found a peculiar peace. But peace, like everything else, has its limits. Over the years, his quiet investments had grown into something enormous. Through a private holding company most people had never heard of, Marcus had been buying struggling hotel chains across the country, restoring them, modernizing them, treating their employees, the real backbone of any hotel, with the dignity he wished someone had shown him. The Wakefield Grand was his next acquisition. The final signature was scheduled for tonight, during the gala, in a meeting upstairs with the hotel's board. Nobody on the staff level knew. Not even Regina Hartley, who ran this hotel like her personal kingdom, had any idea that the man she dismissed daily as the Bellhop already held a majority stake in the building she stood in. Marcus, called Desmond, the bell captain, sticking his head into the locker room. Gala's starting. Regina wants extra hands in the lobby. You know how she gets when board members show up. Marcus nodded, tucking in his shirt. I know how she gets. Desmond hesitated. Just, keep your head down tonight, alright? She's been a nightmare all week. Something about investors. She wants everything perfect. I always keep my head down, Marcus said quietly. But what Desmond didn't know, what nobody knew, was that tonight, for the first time in 6 years, Marcus would not be keeping his head down because he had no choice. He would be choosing to. Regina Hartley had clawed her way to general manager through 20 years of ruthless ambition. She came from money, lost most of it in a divorce that humiliated her publicly, and rebuilt her image by becoming the most feared, most particular manager in the city's hospitality circuit. She believed perfection was control, and control was the only thing keeping her from becoming irrelevant again. She did not see staff as people. She saw them as instruments, useful when polished, replaceable when not. And there was something about Marcus specifically that irritated her in a way she couldn't fully explain. Perhaps it was the way he never groveled. Perhaps it was the calm in his eyes when she barked orders, a calm that felt, infuriatingly, like quiet dignity instead of submission. Tonight, dignity was the last thing she wanted near her Gala. She stood at the center of the lobby, clipboard in hand, surveying the staff like a general inspecting troops before battle. Listen up, she announced, her voice cold and precise. Tonight is not just a party. Tonight, our board chairman is bringing potential new investors through this lobby. Everything must be flawless. I will not have this hotel embarrassed by sloppiness. Her eyes swept across the staff lined along the wall, housekeepers, servers, valets, bellhops, and landed, as they always seemed to, on Marcus. You, she said. Stay near the luggage carts. Do not approach guests unless told. Do you understand? Yes, ma'am, Marcus replied evenly. She studied him another second, as if searching for insubordination in his stillness, then turned away with a small, dismissive scoff. Good. But what happened next shocked everyone in that lobby. As the first wave of black town cars pulled up outside, an elderly couple stepped out, struggling with 2 heavy suitcases and a cane. The valet was occupied elsewhere. Desmond was across the room. And Marcus, seeing the elderly woman stumble slightly under the weight of her bag, did what 6 years of decency had trained into him. He stepped forward. Allow me, ma'am, he said gently, taking the suitcase from her hands with practiced ease, offering his arm for balance. The woman smiled, relieved. Oh, thank you, young man. You're very kind. It should have ended there. A small act of service. A small kindness in a lobby full of indifference. But Regina saw it. And in front of the gathering crowd of arriving guests, board members, and photographers capturing the gala's opening moments, she decided this was the moment to make an example. Excuse me, Regina's voice rang out, sharp as broken glass, cutting through the lobby's polite chatter. Heads turned. Conversations paused. She marched toward Marcus, heels clicking against marble like gunfire. What exactly do you think you're doing? She demanded, loud enough for the elderly couple, for the photographers, for the entire crowd to hear. Marcus straightened, suitcase still in hand. Ma'am asked for help with her bags. I was simply. I gave you an instruction, Regina interrupted, stepping closer, her eyes blazing with something that looked almost like satisfaction. Stay by the carts. Do not approach guests. Is that too complicated for you? The elderly woman frowned. He was only helping me, dear, there's no need to. But Regina wasn't listening. She had an audience now, and something dark and ugly in her wanted them to see her in command, wanted them to see her put someone in their place. Look at him, she said, gesturing at Marcus's uniform with theatrical disgust, loud enough for the gathering crowd. 6 years in this position, and he still can't follow simple instructions. This is exactly the kind of unprofessionalism I work every single day to eliminate from this hotel. A ripple of laughter moved through a cluster of younger guests near the bar, the kind of cruel laughter that comes easily when someone else is being humiliated and you feel safe it isn't you. Marcus felt the heat crawl up his neck. He felt every eye in that lobby on him. He felt, for one terrible second, like he was 19 years old again, before the money, before the company, before anything, just a black boy in an ill-fitting uniform being told, in front of strangers, that he didn't belong. "Sir," he said quietly, addressing not Regina, but steadying himself, "I apologize for any confusion." "Don't apologize to me like that's the end of it," Regina snapped, emboldened by her own performance. "Stand up straight. Fix your collar. You represent this hotel, and frankly, you represent it poorly." The elderly woman looked horrified, but said nothing further, too uncertain to intervene against the hotel's own manager. Marcus straightened his collar. His hands did not shake. His voice did not break. He simply looked at Regina, and something in his expression shifted, not anger, not humiliation, but something far more unsettling. He smiled. A small, calm, knowing smile. "Of course," he said softly. "Whatever you say." Regina blinked, thrown for half a second by the strange serenity in his face. She expected shame. She expected his eyes to drop to the floor the way they always had. Instead, there was something almost like pity in the way he looked at her. She didn't understand it. And it bothered her more than she would admit. "Get back to the carts," she ordered, turning sharply on her heel, gathering her composure as cameras clicked around her, capturing what she believed was a moment of firm leadership. What she didn't know was that one of those cameras belonged to a journalist covering the gala for a business magazine. And what she really didn't know was that the board chairman, watching from across the lobby with a glass of champagne in his hand, had just witnessed the entire scene, and recognized the bellhop she'd humiliated immediately. His face went pale. Because he was the only person in that lobby, besides Marcus himself, who knew exactly who Marcus Webb was. Harold Linwood, chairman of the Wakefield Hotel Group's board, had spent the last 3 weeks in confidential negotiations with a private holding company called Sterling Crest Capital. The negotiations had been unusually quiet, conducted mostly through lawyers and a single point of contact who insisted on minimal public exposure. Tonight, Harold was finally scheduled to meet the buyer in person, upstairs, after the gala's opening hour, to finalize the largest acquisition in the hotel chain's history. He had been told the buyer's name was Marcus Webb. He had assumed, given the formal tone of the contracts and the size of the deal, that he was about to meet some Wall Street executive in a $1,000 suit. He had never imagined the buyer was already inside the building, in a bellhop's uniform, being humiliated in the lobby by his own general manager. Harold's stomach dropped as he watched the scene unfold. He had met Marcus only once before, briefly, during a video call 3 weeks earlier, where Marcus had spoken with the calm precision of a man who had built something significant and intended to protect it carefully. Harold remembered thinking, even then, that there was something deliberately unassuming about him, a man who didn't need to prove anything to anyone. Now Harold understood why. He set down his champagne glass and moved quickly through the crowd, his pulse hammering. He had to reach Marcus before Regina did any further damage, not just to Marcus's dignity, but to a deal worth hundreds of millions of dollars, a deal that could vanish the instant the buyer decided he no longer wanted anything to do with this hotel or the people running it. But nobody knew the truth yet. Not the guests. Not the staff. Not even Regina, still riding the high of her public display of authority, completely unaware that she had just insulted the one person who controlled her entire future. As Harold approached, Marcus was already walking calmly toward the staff corridor, suitcase delivered, expression composed, as if nothing unusual had happened at all. "Mr. Webb," Harold said quietly, falling into step beside him, his voice low enough that no one else could hear. "I need a word. Privately." Marcus glanced at him, recognition flickering in his eyes. "Mr. Linwood. I take it you saw that. Harold's jaw tightened. I saw all of it. I am so sorry. That woman has no idea who you. I know, Marcus said simply. That's rather the point, isn't it? Harold studied him, confused. You're not upset. Marcus paused at the door to the staff corridor, his hand resting on the frame. For the first time, something flickered behind his calm exterior, not anger, but exhaustion, the kind that comes from years of small wounds finally adding up to something heavier. I've been upset for 6 years, Mr. Linwood, he said quietly. Tonight isn't about being upset. Tonight is about deciding what kind of owner I want to be. Harold didn't fully understand what that meant yet. But he would, very soon. At 9:30, while the Gala buzzed on below, Marcus rode the service elevator to the 20th floor, still in his Bellhop uniform, and stepped into the hotel's executive boardroom, a space he had only ever cleaned trash bins outside of, never entered. Harold Linwood was already there, along with 2 other board members and a lawyer holding a leather folder containing the final contracts. They all rose slightly as Marcus entered, an instinctive gesture of respect that would have stunned Regina had she seen it. Gentlemen, Harold said, his voice carrying the weight of what he was about to reveal, I'd like you to formally meet Marcus Webb, founder and majority owner of Sterling Crest Capital. The buyer. The lawyer's eyes widened slightly, glancing between the uniform and the name on the contract. Marcus removed his bellhop cap and set it on the table, a small, quiet gesture that felt enormous in that room. I imagine this is unexpected, he said calmly, taking a seat. I apologize for the uniform. I had a shift to finish. One of the board members, a heavy-set man named Philip Ross, blinked rapidly. You work here? As staff? I do, Marcus said. I have for 6 years. Why? Philip asked, genuinely bewildered. You could buy this entire block. Marcus considered the question carefully before answering. Because my mother got sick 4 years ago, and I needed something simple to hold on to while everything else felt uncertain. And because, he added, his voice quieting, working here taught me something about this hotel that no financial report ever could. Harold leaned forward. What's that? That the people who actually carry this place, the housekeepers, the bellhops, the kitchen staff, are treated like they're disposable. And the people at the top, Marcus said, his eyes briefly distant, have built a culture where cruelty toward staff is mistaken for high standards. The room fell silent. I assume, Marcus continued, you all witnessed, or will soon hear about, what happened in the lobby tonight. Harold exhaled. I saw it myself. I'm deeply sorry, Mr. Webb. Regina Hartley has run this hotel with an iron grip for years, and frankly, her numbers have always justified the board overlooking her management style. Her management style, Marcus repeated quietly, just humiliated the man about to become her employer, in front of 200 witnesses and at least 1 journalist with a camera. Philip Ross paled. A journalist? Sienna Cole, Marcus said. Business correspondent. I recognized her from a piece she wrote on hospitality industry labor practices last year. I imagine she got quite a good photograph tonight. Harold rubbed his temples. This could become a publicity disaster. It could, Marcus agreed. Or, he added, his tone shifting, calm but resolute, it could become something else entirely. What happened next would change everything, not just for Regina, but for the entire hotel, and for every employee who had ever been treated as invisible within its marble walls. But the contracts were not signed yet. And what the board didn't know was that Marcus had one condition for completing this deal, a condition that would directly determine Regina Hartley's fate. Word moves fast in a hotel. By the time Marcus returned to the lobby an hour later, back in his uniform, having quietly excused himself from the boardroom to finish his shift, a decision that confused the board but one he insisted on, a strange energy had begun rippling through the staff. Desmond pulled him aside near the service hallway, eyes wide. Marcus, what is going on? Harold Linwood himself came down looking for you. The board members were all standing when you walked into a meeting. People are saying things. What things? Marcus asked, allowing himself the smallest smile. That you're not just staff, Desmond whispered. That you're connected to the new owners somehow. Marcus said nothing, which, in its own way, said everything. Within the hour, the rumor spread through the kitchen, through housekeeping, through the valet stand outside. Some staff members, the ones who had always treated Marcus with quiet kindness despite Regina's example, felt a flicker of hope they didn't quite understand yet. Others, who had laughed along with Regina's cruelty over the years out of fear or convenience, felt a creeping unease. Regina herself, however, remained blissfully unaware, far too occupied basking in compliments from gala guests about how smoothly the evening was running. It seemed, for a moment, like Marcus held all the power now, like justice had already quietly arrived, like the universe had simply corrected itself the way it should. The staff began treating him differently within hours. Smiles. Nods. A few hesitant, awkward apologies from people who had laughed earlier that evening. It felt, briefly, like victory. But it wasn't. Because what none of them knew, what Marcus himself hadn't fully processed yet, was that Regina was about to make one more move. A move that would nearly cost dozens of hotel employees their jobs, and would test whether Marcus's quiet dignity could survive one final, devastating betrayal. At 11:15, as the gala wound toward its final hour, Regina received a phone call in her office that made her blood run cold. It was Sienna Cole, the journalist. "Ms. Hartley," Sienna said, her voice professionally neutral but carrying an unmistakable edge. "I'm writing a piece about tonight's incident with one of your bellhops. I have it on camera. I also understand he may have a connection to Sterling Crest Capital. Care to comment?" Regina's hand tightened around the phone. "I don't know what you're talking about." "The man you humiliated in the lobby tonight," Sienna said. "Marcus Webb. Does that name mean anything to you?" It did not. Not yet. And that ignorance was about to become the most dangerous thing in the building. Regina hung up, her mind racing, fear curdling into something more dangerous, desperation. If a journalist was sniffing around, if her name might end up attached to some viral story about a racist hotel manager, or cruel boss, her career, the only thing she had left after her divorce, the only identity she had rebuilt from ashes, could collapse overnight. She made a decision that would prove catastrophic. She marched down to HR and demanded Marcus's personnel file, intending to find some justification, some past disciplinary note, anything she could use to claim her treatment of him had been warranted. When she found nothing, 6 years of spotless performance reviews, commendations from guests, even a note from a former manager calling him the most dependable employee on staff, her panic deepened. So instead, she did something far worse. She drafted a termination notice. Her reasoning, written in the file, was almost laughably thin: insubordination, approaching guests against direct supervisor instruction, repeated pattern of undermining management authority in public settings. She backdated 2 minor infractions from years earlier that had never resulted in disciplinary action, stretching them into a narrative that painted Marcus as a problem employee rather than the man he actually was. She believed that if she fired him before the story broke, before anyone connected him formally to Sterling Crest Capital, she could frame the entire lobby incident as a manager simply enforcing standards on a troubled employee, and bury the truth before it ever reached the press. She had no idea she was about to fire the man who, in less than 12 hours, would legally own her job, her office, and the entire hotel chain beneath her feet. At 11:40, security found Marcus in the staff break room and handed him the termination letter. "I'm sorry, man," the security guard said quietly, clearly uncomfortable. "Hartley's orders. Effective immediately." Marcus read the letter slowly. The fabricated infractions. The cold, bureaucratic language designed to erase 6 years of his life with a single signature. For the first time that night, something inside him went very still and very quiet, not rage, but a deep, settled resolve. They thought the fight was over. They were completely wrong. Marcus did not argue with security. He did not raise his voice. He simply folded the termination letter, placed it in his pocket, and walked, not toward the exit, but toward the elevator that led to the executive floor. Harold Linwood was still in the boardroom, finalizing logistics with the lawyer, when Marcus walked in, still in uniform, and placed the termination letter on the table. "I believe," Marcus said calmly, "this complicates our negotiations." Harold picked up the letter, read it, and felt the blood drain from his face for the second time that night. "She fired you? Tonight? After everything?" "She doesn't know who I am," Marcus said. "To her, I'm still just the bellhop who embarrassed her in front of guests. She's trying to erase the inconvenience before the story gets bigger." Philip Ross, still seated at the table, looked physically ill. "Mr. Webb, I want to be absolutely clear, this woman does not represent the values of this board. We had no knowledge of." "I believe you," Marcus interrupted gently. "And that's precisely why what happens next matters so much." He reached into his jacket and withdrew something the board hadn't expected, a small flash drive. "What's that?" Harold asked. "Insurance," Marcus said. 6 years of quiet observation. I never set out to investigate anyone. But when you're invisible the way staff are invisible to people like Regina, you see things. You hear things. Conversations had in hallways, assuming the bellhop carrying bags doesn't matter enough to notice. He slid the drive across the table. "This contains records I compiled informally over time, not for any legal case, simply because patterns concerned me. Wage discrepancies between staff Regina favored and staff she didn't. Complaints filed by housekeepers that mysteriously disappeared from HR records. A pattern of disciplinary write-ups disproportionately affecting Black and Latino employees compared to others making identical mistakes." The room went silent. "I'm not interested in destroying her out of revenge," Marcus said quietly. "But I am interested in the truth. And the truth is that what happened to me in that lobby tonight wasn't an isolated incident. It was a symptom of something this hotel has tolerated for years." Harold set the drive down slowly, the weight of the moment settling over him. "What do you want to do?" Marcus looked at each board member in turn. "I want to finish the acquisition," he said. "And then I want Regina Hartley to stand in front of the very people she humiliated, and answer for what she's built here." What none of them knew yet was that the answer would come faster, and more publicly, than anyone expected. Because downstairs, the gala wasn't over. And Sienna Cole's article had just gone live. The article hit business news sites at 12:02 a.m., just as the gala's closing remarks were being prepared. The headline read, "Hotel manager humiliates veteran employee at gala, then fires him hours later, unaware he's the billionaire buying the company." Phones began buzzing throughout the lobby. Guests who had laughed earlier that evening now stared at their screens in stunned silence, scrolling through photographs of the very scene they had witnessed firsthand, except now, accompanied by a name, a net worth, and a story none of them had known. Regina, standing near the gala's main stage preparing to deliver her closing toast, had no idea what was unfolding until Harold Linwood approached her, his expression grave, flanked by 2 board members and, several steps behind, Marcus Webb, still in uniform, still composed, walking with a quiet authority that hadn't been there hours earlier. "Regina," Harold said, his voice low but firm. "We need to speak. Now." "Harold, I'm about to give my toast, can this possibly?" "It can't wait," Harold interrupted, something in his tone making her pause for the first time all night. Confused, irritated, Regina followed them to a quiet corner near the lobby's grand staircase, still within view of dozens of lingering guests checking their phones with increasingly shocked expressions. "What is going on?" she demanded. Harold gestured toward Marcus. "Regina, I'd like you to formally meet Mr. Marcus Webb, founder and majority owner of Sterling Crest Capital." The words landed like a physical blow. Regina's eyes flicked to Marcus, to the uniform he still wore, to the calm, unreadable expression on his face. That's not possible, she said, her voice suddenly small. He's a bellhop. He was a bellhop, Marcus said quietly, speaking for the first time directly to her since the humiliation in the lobby. For 6 years. While also being the man whose signature, as of 11:58 tonight, finalized the purchase of this hotel and 16 others in the Wakefield group. The crowd of guests nearby, sensing something extraordinary unfolding, began to gather at a respectful distance, phones quietly recording. Regina's face had gone pale, her earlier confidence completely drained. I didn't know. How could I have known? You didn't need to know who I was to treat me with basic decency, Marcus said, his voice calm but carrying enormous weight. That's rather the point, isn't it? You humiliated me tonight not because of anything I did wrong, but because you believed my uniform meant I didn't deserve respect. You assumed my silence meant I had no power. You were wrong on both counts. Mr. Webb, Regina's voice cracked. If I had any idea. That's exactly the problem, Marcus interrupted, not unkindly, but firmly. Respect shouldn't depend on whether someone has money or power. It shouldn't depend on titles or net worth. I watched you, for 6 years, treat staff members as disposable. Tonight wasn't an isolated mistake, Regina. It was a pattern finally catching up to you. He reached into his jacket and withdrew the termination letter she had issued hours earlier, holding it up for her, and for the gathering crowd, to see. You fired me tonight, he said. For approaching a guest who needed help. For undermining your authority. I have 6 years of performance reviews that contradict every word of this letter. And I have something else. He nodded toward Harold, who held up a folder. Documentation, Marcus continued, of wage disparities, buried complaints, and disciplinary patterns that disproportionately targeted employees of color under your management. Documentation the board will be reviewing in full starting tomorrow morning. Gasps rippled through the gathered crowd. Several staff members, who had drifted closer, exchanged stunned glances, years of quiet suffering suddenly being spoken aloud, publicly, undeniably. Regina's composure shattered completely. This is a misunderstanding. I built this hotel's reputation. You built a culture of fear, Marcus said quietly, cutting through her defense without raising his voice. And tonight, that culture finally met its consequence. The lobby had gone almost completely silent, save for the soft hum of recording phones and Regina's ragged breathing. What happens now? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Marcus looked at her for a long moment, not with cruelty, not with the satisfaction of revenge, but with something closer to weary clarity. Now, he said, we find out what kind of person you really are, once the title is gone. The following morning, the story had exploded across every major business and human interest outlet in the country. Headlines praised Marcus not for his wealth, but for the quiet dignity he had shown for 6 years, and the grace with which he had handled the very public reckoning that followed. The board moved quickly. Within 48 hours, Regina Hartley was formally removed from her position as general manager, not solely because of the viral humiliation, but because the documentation Marcus provided revealed a pattern of discriminatory practices serious enough to expose the hotel to significant legal liability had they ignored it. An internal investigation confirmed wage disparities affecting nearly a dozen employees, all of whom were later compensated in back pay as part of the ownership transition. Regina did not face criminal charges, nothing she had done crossed that particular line, but her professional reputation, the very thing she had spent 2 decades rebuilding after her divorce, collapsed almost overnight. No hospitality group wanted to be associated with the now infamous Gala incident. She eventually left the industry entirely, taking a quieter administrative role far from any spotlight, a fall from grace that came not from cruelty inflicted upon her, but from the natural consequence of cruelty she herself had inflicted on others for years. Marcus, for his part, refused every interview request seeking sensationalism. He gave only one statement, calm and brief, to Sienna Cole, the journalist whose reporting had brought the truth to light. "I didn't do this for revenge," he told her. "I did it because for 6 years, people who looked like me, who worked just as hard as anyone in that building, were treated as if they were invisible. I had the unusual privilege of being both invisible and powerful at the same time. Most people never get the chance to prove what they're worth in front of the very people who dismissed them. I simply used that chance to make sure it wouldn't happen to the next person." Under Marcus's new ownership, the Wakefield Grand underwent more than cosmetic changes. He implemented a transparent wage structure across all 17 hotels in the chain, established an anonymous reporting system for workplace mistreatment with mandatory board review, and personally funded a scholarship program for the children of hospitality staff, housekeepers, bellhops, kitchen workers, people whose labor had built every shining lobby and never received recognition to match it. Desmond, the bell captain who had quietly tried to protect Marcus all those years, was promoted to assistant general manager, the first internal promotion under the new ownership. "You knew, didn't you?" Desmond asked him one evening, weeks later, as they reviewed renovation plans for the lobby together. "Even before all this. You knew exactly who you were the whole time." Marcus smiled, the same calm, knowing smile that had unsettled Regina that night. "I always knew who I was," he said. "I just chose, for a while, to let the world see only what it expected to see. Sometimes that's the only way to learn the truth about people. Let them believe you're nothing, and watch what they reveal when they think no one with power is watching. There is a particular kind of cruelty in this world, quiet, casual, almost invisible, that thrives on the assumption that some people don't matter enough to deserve basic decency. It hides behind uniforms and titles, behind marble floors and crystal chandeliers, behind the comfortable belief that power flows only one direction." Marcus Webb's story is a reminder that dignity is never determined by what someone wears, what position they hold, or how loudly the room laughs at their expense. It is determined by the quiet strength to endure unfairness without losing yourself, and the courage, when the moment finally comes, to demand the respect you were always owed. Regina Hartley lost far more than her job that night. She lost the illusion that cruelty without consequence was simply the price of power. And Marcus Webb, the man once dismissed as nothing more than a bellhop, proved that true power has never required permission to exist, it only requires patience, and the right moment to finally be seen. Because sometimes, the person you overlook today is the very person holding your future in their hands tomorrow. And when that truth finally surfaces, the only thing left to decide is whether you'll face it with grace, or be consumed by the very arrogance that blinded you to it in the first place.